Hello and welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. And before I bring on our guest for today's episode, just wanted to quickly announce that we have our AARP Challenge, which is going to be a really exciting event. It happens in February, but the applications are open. So please be sure to check that out. That information is in the chat. And we also have our Women's Health Tech Challenge sponsored by HitLab. It says over here, oh, it was updated. So the new deadline is now the 18th. All of that information is also in the chat feature. So two really awesome pitch events. Please be sure to check those out. And with that, we'd like to bring on our guest for today, Professor Jing, who teaches at Columbia Business School. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Nina.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you so much for being here today. Really excited to kind of jump into it. Maybe to kind of start things off, would love if you could just, share a little bit more about yourself, your background, and really just kind of the journey of your career.
All right. Thank you. And it's great too. I don't get to see who are here, but it's great to get to talk to you today, Nina, and share my experience with other people. So my name is Jing. I'm currently an associate professor at Columbia Business School. So a little bit more information about myself. I grew up in China and I went to undergrad in Hong Kong. So I did my undergrad in actuarial science at Hong Kong University. After that, I came here to the States for grad school. So I actually did my PhD study at Columbia University. And before coming back to Columbia as a faculty, I was actually a professor at Northwestern University. So I spent a few years in Chicago before moving back to New York.
That's amazing. So teaching is in your blood. This is something that you've done a lot. That's incredible. And can you, go for it.
No, I was just going to say that as a professor, I do teaching and research. That's like the two most fun part about my work.
That's incredible. And speaking of which, would love if you could explain a little bit more kind of about, what does it mean to be a professor and a researcher in this space, and what do you teach?
Yeah, I would love to. As I said, as a professor, teaching and research are kind of the core of our work. Mm-hmm. So in terms of teaching here at Columbia Business School, I teach our first year MBA students a core class on managerial statistics, which is a really fun class to teach because this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. And I think it's actually very, very important for our future business leaders to know more about the science and the arts of working with data.
Right.
So I think this is a very fun class. And also teaching MBA is a lot of fun because we have a very diverse student body. So it's always a great pleasure to hear about their own experience. So it's more like I'm learning a lot from them and maybe even more than what they learn from me.
That is incredible. I love that. And kind of, and for you, I'm just so curious, as a professor of this work, I know you were saying that that's kind of like a core competency. And I totally agree. I feel like as data, I think is getting more and more traction. There's so much, we hear about it all the time, all of the advancements that are being made. So it is really awesome to be able to kind of expose, the future leaders, the students to being able to, have applications with data, because it's just going to become more and more meaningful, especially kind of within the healthcare space.
Yeah. And I guess my connection to healthcare is mostly from my research work. So I actually work on healthcare operations management. I guess to be more specific, I work closely with hospitals to improve their care delivery from both the patient side and also from the care provider side, like from the frontline worker side, I would say.
That's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about this research and kind of how you utilize data to help with these efficiency goals?
Yep. So I actually use both mathematical modeling and data to help hospitals improve the efficiency of care delivery. So to make care delivered, to better utilize the limited amount of resources we have in the healthcare setup, and also to offer better quality of care for patients. So I use data for mainly two parts of my work. The first part is to be able to identify the correct causal relationship we see in practice. So for example, I would like to know how would the delay of treatment affect patient outcome.
Wow.
So I would also like to quantify or even come up with the correct measure. How do we measure the workload of nurses? Right? And then to quantify how nursing workload is going to affect the burnout of nurses. So these are all important empirical questions that I'm trying to answer with data. So try to correctly identify and quantify what are the causal effects of these on patient outcome or nursing welfare.
That is incredible. And I'm so curious because I think, we've heard, I know the pandemic was definitely kind of a big catalyst, but it's by no means kind of the only reason. But, we've been hearing about, healthcare worker burnout, I think just in general, right, in the past few years. So it's really interesting that you're kind of doing work to really understand kind of some of those causes. Do you have any insights that you can share with us when it comes to whether that's nurse burnout or I would say just employee burnout in general?
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to acknowledge what is the actual workload our employees or nurses are experiencing, right? So these days, with the improvement of technology and all these electronic healthcare record systems, then people naturally would pull information from these systems to start forming like workload measures. So for example, they could say, I'm going to see how many tasks the nurses are doing or how many medications the nurses are administering and things like that. So this definitely help us form like accurate, like a good measure of the nursing workload. But we also have to realize that these like data-driven measures have its own limitations, right? If I'm dealing with a patients that involve a lot of educational tasks or involve a lot of communication to families, these are not necessarily accurately captured in the data we have. So then in addition to that, we also allow the nurses to put in their own perceived workload through this professional judgment-based input, right? So then we have to find a way to decide what are influencing the nurse's perceived workload versus this purely data-driven way of task-based or order-based workload. And I think the first important thing in this type of work is for us to understand what is really contributing to the nursing workload. And I think nursing in particular is quite different from other types of jobs because you are dealing with people and you're dealing with patients, and patient could be very different in terms of their needs, their severity, their urgency. Right? So we really need to take these information into account to properly balance the workload of different nurses.
Absolutely. I love that you really, recognize kind of like that invisible labor that's done that's not really accounted for. And I'm so curious. I know that you were kind of mentioning right now that a lot of that information that's just not readily available in a chart is kind of inputted by the nurses or by the employees. Do you see a potential future where that can kind of also be kind of measured or documented through data?
Yeah, I think gradually we will be able to get that. So I think we are at the stage where we see a lot of benefit from data and from all these data-driven methodologies. But on the other hand, I think we still need the professional input from nurses, from doctors. So we are still at the stage where the two sides could actually learn from each other and being able to achieve a better outcome than what they would be able to achieve by themselves.
I love that. Absolutely. It really is kind of like a symbiotic relationship between the two.
Yeah. So I guess that's one way how I utilize data. I've said that there's also a second way I utilize data. So I think that might be the most familiar way to people. So I'm using data to develop prediction models, right? So these are simple things like predicting the volume of patients in the emergency department, predicting the risk of deterioration of patients and things like that. And I guess the key thing that I view my research as contributing to this predictive analytics domain is that I not only develop these prediction models, but I'm also trying to understand how to incorporate these predictive information into your actual decision making. If I know how many patients are going to be in my ED, what's the implication is going to be on my actual decision? Does that mean I need to staff more people? Does that mean I have to say more no to those transfer requests? So I guess we are trying to more concretely quantify how these predictive information are going to actually affect your decision making, and then to evaluate the real value of this information on how it could actually help you improve the performance of your system.
Wow, that is incredible. And I'll just say, anecdotally, as someone who was, who fell victim to cold and flu season, which started early this year, I think, especially kind of from seeing that from a patient perspective, I think, this type of work, especially with the predictive analytics, can really have a really big impact. And kind of curious from your perspective too, how can higher utilization of resources, or even just more intentional or thoughtful utilization of resources, create better quality care?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the times there are a few things about how we utilize resources. Well, in the healthcare domain, I think we are always facing a shortage of resources, right? There's always the strain there. I think there are a few things. One is like how to better match resource with demand, right? So even like in a highly resource stringent environment, we've probably seen some department are having more resources than other departments. So then it's a matter of, are we having the right amount of resources in the right place? So there's always, like, if we see there's room to move things around, that's always a good thing, right? So we can better match the demand with the supply side. The other thing is that a lot of the resources can be made more flexible. And these flexible resources provide a lot of buffer to hedge against a lot of the uncertainties and the variabilities we see from the patient demand side. We all know that this is the flu season, so the demand from these patients with flu is going to go up. But then after the flu season, the demand from these patients are really going to drop, right? So it's not like you can have a permanent amount of resources invested there to only handle this type of patients. So we know that the demand are going to change over time. And even if it doesn't change in terms of the high variability, there's still stochasticity because we are dealing with a very heterogeneous patient population.
Absolutely.
So then the thing is how to make your resource more flexible to deal with this ever-changing patient needs.
That is incredible. And there's two things that you sparked for me that I would love your insight on. I think the first thing that you mentioned was the fact that, patients they vary so much, whether, we talk about just background, but even things like health literacy, et cetera. So how is there a way that that's kind of accounted for in terms of the predictive modeling, or is there anything that you kind of do as a researcher to kind of take that into consideration?
So we definitely see that patients are very heterogeneous in terms of their needs, in terms of their socioeconomic background, right? So I think there's both nice things about utilizing that information to make something happen, but we also, as people who's implementing these data-driven policies, be aware of the potential equity issue that could be involved. So I guess I can give you a very concrete example. So for example, I recently work a lot on outpatient scheduling, especially for telehealth patients. And our study have found that telehouse visit, like offering this option to do the medical consultations through telehouse, really help lower the barrier of attending these medical appointments, right? And this is especially beneficial for socially disadvantaged patient population. Because if you think about these people, they would often work on very restrictive hours, long and restrictive hours. So they simply have less time to attend the medical appointment, or they just have less luxury to commit a substantial amount of time to go to this medical appointment. So offering these people the telehealth option, really making attending medical appointments less expensive for them, both in terms of the time commitment and of course also the money you have to spend to commute to the clinic, right? So this can help us, this technology can help us lower the barrier and really help us actually improve the equity of access to care among different patients.
100.
There's another example where using data may actually hurt patients. So for example, we also know that in the outpatient scheduling setting, no-show is a big issue. So even in like a very well-managed clinics, the no-show rate could be as high as 20 to 30%. Right?
Wow.
So this is bad for the patients because that interrupts their adherence to the care plan. This is also bad for the clinic because they might have like valuable medical resources get wasted because they're sitting idle there, not being able to see the patients. So then a common way clinics use to kind of hedge against this no-show behavior is to do overbooking. Right? And now if you think about, I have this predictive information about patients' no-show behavior, and then I'm going to basically overbook more for patients who's more likely to no-show. And then if you think about who are the patients who are more likely to no-show, it's usually the patients who are working on more like restrictive jobs, right? And these are patients who are in general from more socially disadvantaged groups. Right. And if you actually overbook them a lot, then you're essentially penalizing the people who actually show up, who's well-behaved and show up for their appointment, because if they do show up, then they have to wait long hours before they can see the physician. So this would be something like you're thinking about using predictive analytics to improve the utilization of your resources, but you actually might also create a lot of disparity in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good this really interesting point about kind of the role of data, but always kind of having that asterisk of, what are the real world implications of utilizing these types of data-driven approaches. That's so fascinating. You had mentioned something about virtual care scheduling, and I'm just so curious because I think, telemedicine, and at least at Kaiser, we're just continuing to build a lot of infrastructure around virtual care now that it was first developed, or it was first, I would say, scaled in the pandemic as being kind of like this Band-Aid because we had no choice. Everything was closed. But now I think, it's a mainstay. It's now becoming that much more accessible, and people are adopting it a lot more. So curious about are you doing any predictive analytic work when it comes to like telemedicine or virtual care, anything that you're doing in that space?
Not much on the predictive side. I think we're still at the stage of trying to understand the patients and the physician behavior side when you introduce this new modality of care to them. Similar to Kaiser, the healthcare organizations that I work with, even though the telehealth technology was there for a long time, but if we look at their actual data, there's almost no telehealth visits before the pandemic. It was kind of like almost everything suddenly happens in March 2020 when the pandemic hit the city, right? All these people start to offering. And then we see like a huge increase in the telehealth visits. And now, like even after everything goes back to normal, we still see a significant amount of telehealth being there. So I think this is like basically saying that, or at least I conjecture that telehealth as a new modality of care is going to stay. It's not just something we use to to deal with the pandemic. It's going to be
Right.
something that people are going to accept as part of the healthcare delivery system. So then in this context, we are taking steps to understand how telehealth is going to affect the patient care, right? Both in terms of the quality of the care, the access to care, and also like how it's going to affect the patient behavior, their adherence to care plans, even their on-time behavior, their no-show behavior, right? So these are important to answer the subsequent question about how to optimally utilize this limited amount of medical resources. On the other hand, we would also, of course, would like to understand how offering this new modality of visit are going to affect the workflow of the physicians, right? If you think about the physicians now, they not only have to offer in-person visit, but they also have to offer telehealth visit. And then there's a blended modality of work that they have to deal with on the day-to-day basis. So how would that affect their workflow, and what is the optimal way of designing the workflow for them?
That's a really good point, because these aren't two separate things, at least on the back end when it comes to resourcing, they're managing both. Yeah, that's a really good call. I think that's really important to be able to recognize when it comes to what, future state solutions could look like. I think you have, such a unique lens, especially kind of sitting really on this part when it comes to data utilization, resource management, kind of beyond just your research and all of the amazing work that you're doing. Are there any other, healthcare developments that you are seeing that you're excited about? Any trends that you're seeing, whether that's in data or just healthcare in general, that you're very excited about?
Yeah. So I'm very excited about telehealth, which we've already talked about as
Love
as
it.
a new modality of delivering of care, right?
Yeah.
And then on the treatment side, I'm really excited about all these development on precision medicine, personalized care, right? So this really help us improve the quality of care each of us as individual are able to receive. And I think this new thing is really driven by the development in multiple different areas. Right? First of all, there's of course development in the medical technology itself, and on all these like a personalized health track systems, right? You could actually now measure or monitor a lot of the things. And then there's also the development of the simply like we now have more data available. So the growing availability of data. And then there's also the development in computer science of all these advanced technology in machine learning, reinforcement learning, right? Now you see like all these different areas come together, and you see researchers from different areas come together to work in this area of precision medicine and personalized health. So I think this is really an exciting area that I think we're gonna see a lot of exciting breakthroughs in maybe a matter of a few years' time.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it's as you were describing it, I was thinking, wow, it's actually kind of beautiful to see all of these different disciplines kind of come together for this really impactful kind of common goal. So yeah, I agree. I think that I'm very excited to see, what that looks like. And also very curious, I think, with the work that you're doing as kind of a research, as a professor where it's research as well as teaching, would love if you could share, what does kind of a typical day in the life look like for you?
So it really depends on, I guess, whether it's my teaching day or my research day. Yeah. So if it's my teaching day, then usually I spend time just preparing the course material and the delivery of the courses. And I would also enjoy like talking to my students, even outside the classroom, just to get to know them a bit more. So that would be what my teaching day looks like. And for my research day, I usually try to book some quiet time for me to think about the research problem myself, to work out some math details myself. But I also have meetings with collaborators, students, hospital managers to try to understand like what's going on and how are we going to work together to make progress on our research projects. But overall, I think being a professor is a little bit like running your own startup, I think.
Really? I love it.
Because you do have a lot of flexibility, right? It's not like you're working for someone, you have to be in the office, I don't know, by 8 or 9 a.m. and you are free to go home after 6 or something. You're like, it's more like you get to control the speed at which you work. You also get a lot of flexibility in terms of choosing what you want to work on. So
Right.
like for me, deciding to work on the research projects is like having a great startup idea, right? So come up with this idea, you think it's going to be great, you put in the effort to find the right method. And
Mhm.
sometimes it even involves like going around and put together the right resources to make this happen. And then you start working on this and hope that one day it will be a huge breakthrough, it will make a huge impact. So this is exactly the mentality, I think, as someone
Totally.
who's running a startup. Yeah.
I love it. You're the CEO.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think the good thing is that you get to choose what you want to work on, and you really have a lot of flexibility. Let's say if it's a Wednesday, even though it's a Wednesday, if I decided that I'm not in a good mood to work today, then I can easily decide that I'm probably going to take the day off and do something else to recharge myself. But on the other hand, I think there's not a fixed working hour. So I do find myself work almost all the time. So if you actually count how many hours I work, I think I work a lot more than my peers who work in the industry.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's the flip side of both when it comes to timing. I
Yeah.
love that. Well, I know that we are almost 3 minutes out, so would love if this is one of my favorite questions to ask our guests to kind of round out our conversation. But would love if you could share with us, this of course is Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. As a health tech leader in this space, would love if you could just share any words of wisdom for us, any career advice that you have for us, anything like that would be wonderful.
Okay. I'm not very good at giving
No,
advice, but probably I can say something that I learned from my own experience. So I think I used to like I look up to a lot of people, right? I admire these people who are very successful in my field. So I would often want to set them as my role models and try to mimic what they are doing, right? Try to
Mhm.
follow what they did. But sometimes this can actually be very hard for me, and something I realized that I will never be able to do that. I guess give you a more concrete example. When I'm teaching, I want to be a great teacher, and I realized that being able to crack good jokes in a classroom really make the environment more engaging, right? It just
Absolutely.
inject this little funny thing and energy in the classroom, but I could never be able to see myself as someone who's good at cracking jokes. Yeah. So then I start to gradually realize that everyone has their own strengths and style. So then the most important thing is to find the style and way that works best for you. And I feel like there are many different ways that could lead you to success, or there are many different ways that could achieve the same goal that you want to achieve. I guess it's not necessarily that you have to follow someone else's method.
Yeah.
It's more important to see what you are good at and what is the most suitable way for you to do it.
I love that. I think that's absolutely incredible. You are right. There's so many ways to success. And I think especially being able to have role models as inspiration, but not as a direct comparison, I think is also very, very, that's really good advice. I really like that. Thank you so much, Professor Tom. Well, thank you so much for just taking the time to chat with us today. I know we're at time, but I really appreciate you sharing your amazing work with us. I think what you're doing is absolutely incredible, and so excited to see how it grows and develops and continues to impact healthcare. So really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. And just an FYI, wanted to let everyone know that we have our next episode on Wednesday, and the AARP and Women's Health Tech Challenge events are both available. The applications are live, so please be sure to check that out. And I will see everyone next Wednesday. Bye, everyone.